full of $100 bills in Pop's closet. It was hidden beneath his war medals and fishing tackle. When I showed Mom, her face drained of all color. She snatched it from my hands like it burned. "You never saw this," she said. "Ever." Then she tucked it somewhere I never saw again. No explanation. No questions allowed. That was the day I learned. In our family, truth was more dangerous than poverty. Pop, my grandfather, had died the winter before, quietly like everything else in our house. He was the only person who ever spoke to me gently. The last time I saw him, I was standing at the foot of his bed in the nursing home. His hand trembled as he reached into his flannel pocket and pressed something into my palm. "Sometimes what's buried waits," he whispered. "You'll know when." It was a brass key, cold and oddly heavy. I kept it in my drawer for years, never knowing what it opened. I almost forgot about it, until the day the letter came from the bank. That's when everything began to unravel. Back then I still believed we were just poor. But that belief was about to be broken wide open. It arrived on a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday that smelled like burnt coffee and leftover snow. I almost missed it, just another envelope tucked between coupons and medical bills. But the name caught my eye. Not my mother's. Not the usual resident of. It was addressed to me. Claire Whitmore. In clean black ink, written like someone actually meant it. Inside was a single sheet, thick and official looking, from a local bank in town. One I'd never even heard of. It said a safety deposit box had been registered under the name Raymond Whitmore. And I'd been named as the legal key holder. All I had to do was come in with ID and the physical key. I must have read it 5 times before I remembered the brass key sitting in my sock drawer, tucked beneath old notebooks and broken pens. I held it in my hand that night, turning it over again and again like maybe it would suddenly speak. But it didn't. It just sat there, small, cold and quietly certain. Like it had been waiting. I didn't tell Mom. Not because I planned to lie, but because I knew what silence meant in our house. She had made that clear when I was 12. When she took the shoebox from my hands like it was a loaded weapon. If Pop had left something behind, something hidden, I wasn't sure whose side she'd be on. The next morning I called in sick to work. I packed the letter, the key and my nerves into a canvas bag and drove into town. The bank sat on Main Street. One of those places that looked like it hadn't changed since 1973. Brass fixtures. Wood paneling. A ticking clock on the wall that sounded too loud. The woman behind the counter barely looked up when I handed her the letter. But when I showed her the key, her eyes changed. She typed something into her computer, then led me down a hallway behind a locked glass door. My hands were shaking. I tried to hide it by tucking them into my sleeves. We stopped in front of a metal vault. "Box 412, she said, unlocking the compartment and stepping back. "Take your time." Inside was a narrow gray drawer. I pulled it out and placed it on the small table in the corner of the room. For a moment I just stared. Whatever this was, it wasn't a shoebox full of cash. It was something quieter. Heavier. I opened the lid. Inside were manila folders, land deeds, stock certificates. A velvet pouch with a gold pocket watch. An unfiled will with my name in ink. And at the very bottom, a letter. Dated 2004. I thought we were just poor. Cold winters, silent dinners, secondhand everything. The kind of poor that didn't look dramatic from the outside. Just quiet and tired. We lived in my grandfather's old farmhouse on the edge of Willow Bend, Indiana. The windows were always taped up in winter, and the floorboards creaked like they were whispering secrets. Mom said the house had character. I think it just hadn't been warm in years. Every morning I'd wake to the hum of the old space heater in my room, already fighting a losing battle against the cold. Breakfast was often dry toast or whatever was left from last night's canned beans. We didn't complain, not because we were strong but because silence had rules in our home. If you asked for more, even just a little, you'd get a look that froze deeper than any winter storm. My mother, Diane Whitmore, worked night shifts at the nursing home. Her shoes always smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. She wasn't cruel, just hard. Her love came in silent forms. A folded blanket, a paid bill, lights that still turned on. But words? Warmth? She rationed those the same way she rationed groceries. Money was never mentioned. If it was, it came with a warning: money doesn't grow on trees, or rich people lose their souls. I believed her. After all, what did we know of wealth? We washed sandwich bags to reuse them and wrapped Christmas presents in old newspaper. When the TV broke, we didn't fix it. When the car stalled, we walked. And yet, something always felt off. Like a faint draft in a locked room. I remember being 12 when I found a shoebox. To see Whitmore. My breath caught. My hands went numb. This wasn't just money. This was something my entire family had chosen to bury. And Pop, even in his silence, had chosen me to unearth it. I didn't go straight home after the bank. I parked 2 blocks away from the farmhouse and just sat there, engine off, key in my lap. The folders were still in my bag, but it felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds now. Like I was carrying someone else's secret, or maybe my own, just uncovered after years underground. My fingers kept brushing the edge of the envelope with the will inside. It was real. My name. His signature. When I finally walked in, Mom was in the kitchen standing over the sink, peeling potatoes with that same dull knife she'd used since I was a kid. The radio buzzed in the background, AM static in old country. She looked up but didn't smile. "You're home early," she said. "Yeah," I answered, hanging my coat. I didn't say where I'd been. Didn't say what I had in my bag. I sat at the table just like I always did, waiting for the silence to do its slow crawl between us. After a minute, I pulled out the letter. Not the will, just the one addressed to C. Whitmore. I slid it across the table like a test I wasn't sure I wanted to pass. He stared at it. Didn't touch it. Didn't blink. Then she turned back to the sink. "Where'd you get that?" I told her. Flat. No drama. Just the truth. The letter. The box. The watch. The will. I waited for a reaction. A question. But all she said was, "He should have burned it." That line stuck in the room like smoke. I asked her why. Why would Pop leave something like that hidden? Why would he leave it to me? And why had we spent our lives pretending we had nothing, when the truth had been locked away in a bank vault not 5 miles from our front door? She didn't answer. Just kept peeling potatoes. Like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Like if she looked up, something would shatter. Finally she spoke. "That money, it came with a cost. He knew that. I knew that. And you will too soon enough." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her, make her say it out loud, make her explain what she meant. But I didn't. Because deep down I already knew. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. About silence. About keeping the truth so tightly sealed that even the people bleeding from it couldn't name the wound. And maybe the saddest part? She still believed it was safer to suffer than to speak. I folded the letter back into my bag quietly. I didn't push her. Not that day. But I knew something had cracked. Not in her, in me. And once that crack opened, there was no sealing it shut again. The next morning I woke before sunrise, the house still wrapped in shadows. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the velvet pouch Pop had left behind, the pocket watch resting in my palm. It was heavier than I expected, the kind of weight that didn't just come from brass. It came from memory. From meaning. I held it up to my ear. It was still ticking. Soft, steady. Like something in this family had refused to die, even when everything else had gone quiet. Downstairs, the heater rattled in protest against another Indiana morning. I moved through the hallway like I had 100 times as a child, but now every creak in the floor sounded different. Like the house had been holding its breath for years. In the kitchen, the radio was on again, that usual blend of farm reports and soft static. It was always on, even when no one was listening. That was the rhythm of this house. Noise without words. I sat at the table, Pop's will in front of me, unfolded now. Claire Whitmore. Sole beneficiary. I traced the signature with my fingertip, imagining his hand, careful, deliberate, weathered from years of labor. He wasn't the type to write things down unless he meant them. Which is why I knew this wasn't an accident. He wanted me to find it. Not Diane. Not Frank. Not January me. That realization sat heavy in my chest, alongside something else I hadn't expected. Guilt. It felt like betrayal to be named in something so sacred when the rest of the family had been kept in the dark. Or maybe they weren't. Maybe they just didn't talk, the way we never did about anything that mattered. Later that day I drove back to the bank. Not because I had to, but because I needed to see it again, to make sure it hadn't all been some strange dream. The woman at the front desk recognized me this time. She didn't smile, but she nodded, and I followed her down the same hallway to the same vault. The air in that room was cold and dry. Industrial. Nothing like the cluttered warmth of the farmhouse. I unlocked the box again, this time slower. More deliberate. I wanted to study everything. The blueprints with Pop's shaky annotations, the names on the stock certificates, companies I'd only heard of on business shows I never watched. A list of land parcels, some in our county, some 3 states away. And again that single envelope. To C. Whitmore. I read the letter for the second time, now absorbing each word like it was a language I was finally learning. Pop hadn't been perfect. He hadn't been open. But he'd left this for me, a map almost, not to the money but to the truth. In his careful script he wrote, "I never knew how to say things out loud. But I hope you'll learn to do what I couldn't. Love doesn't mean silence." I folded it gently, placing it back inside. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by documents that could change everything. And yet, all I could think about was the dinner table at home, how we used to sit in silence while the radio buzzed on. Not because we had nothing to say, but because we were too scared to say it. The truth was, we weren't poor because we had to be. We were poor because someone decided we should stay that way. And I had just stepped into a story that my family spent a lifetime trying to bury. The day I walked into the bank was unusually warm for March, but I felt a chill deep in my bones. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe it was the weight of every unanswered question pressing against my chest. I hadn't told anyone I was going. Not my mother. Not even Aunt January. The key Pop had given me years ago felt almost weightless in my pocket, but somehow, it had pulled me through every hard season of my life like a magnet guiding me toward something bigger. The woman at the front desk scanned the key and then looked at me with a pause. "This locker hasn't been touched since 2004, she said. "We'll need a manager." That year again. The same year Pop passed. The same year I saw my mother burn a letter she never let me read. My throat tightened. When they finally opened the vault and I stepped inside, it felt like I'd entered a tomb. Silent. Sacred. The walls were lined with boxes, each carrying stories no one had asked about in years. Ours was in the back corner. Number 1127. The manager twisted the key and with a soft click the door opened. Inside there were no gold bars or sacks of cash like some childhood fantasy. Just folders. A velvet pouch. A sealed envelope marked C. Whitmore. And land deeds. Stock certificates. An unfiled will. I felt my knees weaken. I sat right there on the small bench, breath shallow, fingers trembling. Each paper I opened unraveled another layer of the lie I had lived inside. The land wasn't just some family tale, it was real. The stocks had value. The will named me. Claire Whitmore. Sole beneficiary. The velvet pouch held Pop's old pocket watch, still ticking after all these years. Somehow that hit me harder than anything else. Time hadn't stopped even when the truth did. I wasn't just poor. I was deliberately kept in the dark. Not because we had nothing, but because someone made sure I believed we had nothing. I clutched the letter to my chest and left the vault without opening it. I wasn't ready, but something inside me had already shifted. The version of my life I'd carried, the hungry, invisible, grateful girl, was beginning to fall apart. And in its place a quiet anger took root. Not just at what was hidden, but at who chose to hide it. I didn't open the letter right away. It sat untouched on my kitchen table for 3 nights, edges worn from where I kept tracing my name, C. Whitmore, in Pop's familiar handwriting. I'd always imagined what he would have said if he were still alive. He never spoke much, not with Mom around. But when he did, it stuck. So I needed silence. I needed to be alone with his words, unfiltered, unburned. On the 4th night, I brewed a cup of tea, turned off the lights, and lit a single candle like it was some kind of ceremony. Maybe it was. My hands were steady, but my heart thudded so loud it drowned out everything else. When I broke the seal, I half expected dust to fall out. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly smudged. But his voice was clear. "Claire, if you're reading this, then the silence has lasted longer than I hoped." He wrote about land he'd bought piece by piece through the years, using money from a business he never told the family about. Said he didn't trust banks at first. Or people. But he trusted me. Said he saw something in my eyes even when I was a child. Something strong enough to carry the truth even if it hurt. He talked about the guilt he felt watching my mom raise me the way she did. Called it a house made of hunger and silence. That part stopped me cold. Because that's exactly what it was. He said Diane, my mother, made them all promise to keep quiet. Said she believed easy money would ruin me, that it came with a curse. But Pop didn't agree. His last line echoed in my bones. Love doesn't mean silence. And silence doesn't mean love. That was when I cried. Not the quiet kind either. The kind that rattles something old and buried. Because deep down I had always known I was living in the echo of a lie. I just didn't know Pop had tried to leave me the truth. I folded the letter and held it to my chest like it could anchor me. The room was still except for the steady tick of his pocket watch beside me. That sound, so small and constant, felt like a promise. That no matter how long they'd tried to bury the truth, time hadn't stopped. It was still mine to reclaim. It was just past noon when my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, Arizona area code. For a second I thought about letting it go to voicemail. but something tugged at me, a thread I couldn't ignore. I answered with a cautious, "Hello?" and was met with a breath before a voice I hadn't heard in years said, "Claire, it's January. Aunt Janet. The one who moved to Tucson and sent Christmas cards that never said much. Always signed love, Jan, like she didn't want to leave fingerprints." I hadn't seen her since Pop's funeral. Even then she'd kept to the back row, sunglasses on indoors, head bowed like shame had followed her across state lines. "I heard," she said. "About the locker. About the will." Her voice wasn't surprised. It was tired. Worn down like something she'd been bracing for. I didn't say anything. Just let the silence stretch, see if she'd try to fill it. She did. "I begged her not to hide it from you. I begged Diane," she whispered, like saying Mom's name too loud would summon her. But she was always the loudest voice in the room. You know that. And Frank, he just followed her lead. I leaned against the counter, heart pounding like I was 12 again, listening through the vent while the grown-ups whispered things they thought I couldn't hear. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, voice flat. Not angry. Not yet. Just hollow. Jan sighed. "Because your mom made us all swear. She said it would ruin you. That you'd grow up greedy, soft. Said money was a poison." But Claire, it wasn't just about the money. It was about the story. About what she wanted you to believe. He paused like the next part was heavier. "There was a woman. In one of the old photos you found, right? Pop holding someone who wasn't Diane's mother." I froze. "Her name was Eliza," Jan continued. "They were supposed to marry. But Diane hated her. Said she was going to split the family. When Eliza left, something broke in all of them. Your mom especially. That's when the silence began. That's when she started rewriting everything." My knees felt weak, so I sat. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was legacy. Erased names. Hidden women. Money as leverage. Silence as punishment. Jan's voice turned soft. "I left because I couldn't live in that kind of truth anymore. Or lie, I guess. But I never stopped thinking about you." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to hang up. But most of me just felt cracked open. Before we ended the call, Jan said something that stayed with me. "That house was never poor, Claire. It was just full of people too scared to live rich in truth." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel crazy for wanting more. I felt furious for being taught not to ask. I waited until dusk before opening the letter again. The one from the bank locker. I'd read it twice already, but something about Aunt Jan's call changed the way the words settled in my chest. It wasn't just ink on old paper anymore. It was a map through everything they'd buried. It started simply. "To Whitmore. If you're reading this, then." The silence finally broke. His handwriting was sharp, tidy. The kind of careful you only learn after years of being misunderstood. "I always meant to tell you in person. But I kept waiting for the right time. And time, as you'll learn, doesn't wait for anything. Not even the truth." He wrote about the land first. The acres upstate, the timber contract, the mineral rights no one ever touched. It was wealth disguised as wilderness. Then came the stocks, the life insurance, the bonds he never cashed. I remembered all those years we'd eat canned ravioli and split a single gallon of milk over 5 days, while this entire legacy sat locked away in metal and silence. Then he wrote about Eliza. She was lightning, Claire. Smart, unafraid, didn't give a damn what people thought. She would have raised you with curiosity, not shame. I held my breath. The photo had haunted me. Pop smiling in a way he never did at home, arm around a woman who looked like she told the truth even when it burned. Your mother never forgave her. Not for leaving, not for loving me, not for making Diane feel like second best. But none of that was your fault. And none of that should have shaped your life. I felt the heat rising in my throat. He had known. All of it. The cold, the silence, the nights I cried over unpaid bills while Mom sat 2 rooms away, staring out the window like the past could still be rearranged. Near the end his tone shifted. Claire, money doesn't fix silence. But it can break the grip it has on you. I didn't hide it for shame. I left it for you because I believed deep down you'd ask questions they wouldn't. And you did. There was no dramatic finish. Just one final line circled twice. Love doesn't mean silence. I held the letter to my chest and stared out the kitchen window, the same one with frost etched across the edges every winter, even when the space heaters ran all night. The truth wasn't warm, not yet. But it was awake. And for the first time in my life, so was I. The morning after I read Pop's letter, the farmhouse felt different. Not warmer, not quieter, just stripped. As if all the false nobility of our struggle had finally peeled off the walls, and what was left behind was honest, if a little raw. I sat at the same chipped kitchen table where I'd eaten so many silent dinners, but now every corner held a question. Every shadow, a lie I'd once accepted as fact. I called the financial advisor again. His voice was calm, measured, like someone used to dealing with grief disguised as money. He confirmed what I already knew but hadn't yet absorbed. Every document in that locker was legally traceable to me. You are the direct beneficiary on the unfiled will, he said. And under Indiana law, unless contested with proof of undue influence or fraud, the assets pass to you. His tone was careful, but I could hear the undertone. You've got a fight coming. I didn't respond right away. My mind was too full of old winters and half-truths. I thought of my mother, how she used to say, some families just aren't meant for more. And I finally understood, it wasn't about what we deserved. It was about what she refused to face. The truth that struggle wasn't our fate, it was her shield. Later that day, Uncle Frank showed up. No warning, just his rusty truck in the gravel and a knock that sounded more like an apology. He stood on the porch like he didn't know whether he was welcome. I heard, he said softly. Jan called me. I let him in. He didn't sit at first. Just looked around like he hadn't been inside since the funeral. Your mom, she asked us to keep it quiet. Said that money ruined people. He paused, eyes wet. But I think silence ruined more. I didn't ask him why he didn't speak up. I already knew. Guilt has a way of freezing people, especially when love and fear are knotted together. Before he left, he handed me something wrapped in an old cloth napkin. Inside was Pop's pocket watch. I hadn't even known it was missing. He gave this to me to hold on to, Frank said, voice trembling. Told me you'd come looking for answers one day. The watch still ticked. That night, I stared at the ceiling in my childhood bedroom, the one with peeling paint and glow-in-the-dark stars I never had the heart to take down. I thought about all the things I used to pray for. A heater that worked, a meal that didn't come from a box, a mother who asked how my day was. And I thought about the truth sitting in folders and dusty deeds. Not just the money but the inheritance of silence. I couldn't fix the past. I couldn't force my mother to reckon with her choices. But I could choose differently. And maybe, just maybe, that was what Pop was really leaving me. Not a fortune. A fork in the road. And this time I wouldn't choose silence. It was late afternoon when I pulled into Mom's driveway. The house looked the same as always. Beige siding, blinds drawn, no flowers on the porch. But something about it felt smaller now, like the lies it held had finally shrunk it down to its true size. I sat in the car for a long time, the weight of the pocket watch in my coat pocket, ticking like a countdown. I didn't know what I was walking into, only that I couldn't walk away anymore. She opened the door before I knocked, like she'd been watching. You came, she said, not quite surprised, not quite welcoming. I stepped inside without asking, the familiar cold of her house clinging to my sleeves. Nothing had changed. Same faded rug, same picture of Pop on the hallway wall, same silence thick enough to choke on. I found the locker, I said. No build-up, no soft landing. Just the truth. She didn't flinch. She just turned and walked into the kitchen like we were about to talk about the weather. I followed her, heart pounding, breath tight. She poured herself a glass of water, didn't offer me one. So, she said, staring at the faucet. How you know? Why? I asked, voice sharp. Why did you let me believe we had nothing? Why did you let me go hungry, cold, drowning in debt, when you knew? She didn't meet my eyes. Because that money came with a cost, she said flatly. And I wasn't going to pass that burden to you. It wasn't your burden to hide, I shot back. It was mine to understand. Mine to choose. Her hands were trembling now. You think money fixes what silence protected? You don't know what that money cost us. You don't know what your grandfather did to get it. Then tell me, I said. Stop hiding behind cryptic sentences and dead men. Tell me the truth. But she didn't. She just sat down, stared at her water glass like it held all the answers. He should have burned it, she whispered. He was wrong to leave it to you. I stood there, the silence screaming between us, louder than any fight we'd ever had. I realized then she wasn't going to give me closure. She was too deep in her story, too tangled in pride and pain, and years of pretending struggle made her strong. I pulled the letter from my coat pocket and set it on the table. He didn't leave me the money, I said. He left me the truth. You buried it, but he wanted it found. As I turned to leave, she said my name just once, soft, almost fragile. I paused but didn't turn around. I wasn't angry that we were poor, I said. I was angry that you let me believe we had no choices. Then I walked out. Not because I wanted to hurt her. Not because I needed revenge. But because I finally understood. Love doesn't mean silence. And I wasn't going to inherit her silence anymore. The days that followed felt like breathing air on a new planet. Familiar sky but different gravity. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not about the money. Not about the will. Not even about the photo of Pop with the woman no one ever mentioned. I needed space to feel the weight of it all without everyone else's hands reaching in. So I stayed quiet, but this time the silence belonged to me. Not the kind that shamed or silenced, but the kind that gave me room to think. I sat with a financial advisor, a kind-eyed woman named Marianne who didn't flinch when I placed the papers on her desk. She scanned the stock certificates, the land deeds, the unfiled will, and nodded slowly. You understand what this means, Claire? She asked. I nodded, but truthfully I didn't. Not fully. All I knew was that it was real. The $2.8 million wasn't some fantasy or trap. It was mine. Wiggly. Quietly. Undeniably. So it didn't feel like winning. It felt like something heavier than that. Like being handed a loaded story with no map of what to do next. I could pay off my student loans, erase my credit card debt, and finally breathe. But more than that, I could do something that mattered. Something that rewrote the script I'd inherited. That's when the idea came, not from spite, not from guilt, but from clarity. I started paperwork for a mental health scholarship at the community college where I worked. I named it after Pop, not to glorify him, but to honor the part of him that left breadcrumbs when everyone else buried the trail. The Raymond Whitmore Scholarship for students from low-income backgrounds, especially those struggling with depression or anxiety. I knew what it felt like to show up every day with a smile and a panic attack. I wanted someone else to feel seen, supported, safe. I told Uncle Frank over the phone. He cried, full chest-heaving sobs I wasn't prepared for. I'm sorry we didn't protect you better, he said. Your mom, we all just followed her lead. We didn't know how to fight her silence. I didn't forgive him, not completely, but I appreciated the truth. That counted for something. Aunt Jen called too from Arizona. Said she always suspected there was more but didn't push. Your mom made us promise, she admitted. Said it was cursed money. Said it would ruin you. Her voice cracked. I think the silence ruined us more. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life I was writing my own ending. Not the one passed down to me, not the one expected. I wasn't going to disappear into struggle. I wasn't going to inherit their shame. I was going to take what was buried and make something grow. That night I took the pocket watch out of its velvet pouch and wound it gently. The ticking filled the room, steady and soft, like a heart that had waited patiently to be heard. I placed it on my nightstand and whispered, I get it now. The truth doesn't come easy. But it stays. And once you hold it, you don't go back. I left Willow Bend in early spring, when the snow was melting, but the ground was still hard, like the town was trying to soften but didn't quite know how. I packed what I needed. The manila folders, the photo of Pop with the woman no one named, the key he gave me, and the pocket watch that never stopped ticking. Everything else. The taped-up windows, the guilt-lined dinner plates, the silence, I left behind. Mom didn't say goodbye. I didn't expect her to. She stood on the porch in her same worn sweater, arms crossed, eyes flat. No apology. No blessing. Just that look, like I was walking away from something sacred. But I wasn't. I was walking toward something honest. Something free. I didn't leave in anger. That part had already burned out. What I carried wasn't rage. It was clarity. I finally saw what our suffering had cost us. Not just comfort or choices, but connection, trust, and the right to imagine more. They built their identity on scarcity. I wasn't going to inherit that blueprint. As I drove past the old hardware store, the diner where the waitresses still call you hun, and the fields Pop used to mow, I realized I didn't hate my town. I just outgrew the version of myself that had to survive it. I had always been told that wanting more meant being ungrateful. But now I understood. Wanting more was how I honored what had been buried. In my new apartment, small but sunlit with real heat and quiet floors, I hung one photo on the wall. Pop, younger than I'd ever seen him, smiling beside a woman in a floral dress. I didn't know who she was, but she looked kind, peaceful, like someone who knew how to live without hiding. I used part of the inheritance to launch a quiet foundation. Not big, not flashy, just real. It funded therapy for young women in small towns like mine. Girls who were told to be quiet, to stop asking, to carry things they didn't choose. I named it the first to say it. The rest? Kept safe. Not because I feared it, but because I respected it. I'd seen what silence could do when paired with fear. I'd lived inside it. I wasn't going to pass that down. Sometimes I still hear Mom's voice in my head. Money doesn't fix what silence protected. Maybe she's right. But I think money can fix the lies we were told about who deserves comfort, who deserves peace, who deserves to choose. The last thing I did before closing the door on that chapter was write a letter. Not to her, not to them, but to the girl I used to be. The one who flinched every time she asked for something. I wrote, "You were never wrong for wanting more. You were just the first to say it out loud. And I hope someone else hears it now. Maybe you, maybe someone who still thinks they're trapped inside a story they didn't write." Subscribe to the channel for more true story-inspired narratives. And remember, sometimes the biggest inheritance isn't money. It's the courage to speak when silence was the rule.